The gunshot that killed her father echoed through Catherine Hayes's mind 3 months later, as the stagecoach rattled westward through Colorado territory, carrying her toward a future she could barely imagine and away from everything she had ever known. She pressed her gloved hand against the worn leather seat, steadying herself as the wheels hit another rut in the primitive road that wound through endless stretches of prairie. The year was 1878, and Catherine was 22 years old, alone in the world except for an uncle she had never met who owned a cattle ranch somewhere near a town called Silver Ridge. Her father, a shopkeeper in St. Louis, had been caught in the crossfire of a robbery gone wrong. Her mother had died when Catherine was just a child. There was nothing left for her back east except debts and memories that felt like broken glass. The other passengers in the stagecoach were a mining company representative who slept more than he spoke, and an older woman named Mrs. Dalton, who had been kind enough to share her biscuits and advice about surviving in the territories. Catherine appreciated the gesture, though she wondered if any amount of advice could truly prepare her for what lay ahead. "You'll want to keep your wits about you, Mrs. Dalton said, adjusting her bonnet as the afternoon sun slanted through the window. "Silver Ridge is rough country. Good people there, mostly, but it takes a certain kind of strength to make a life in these parts." Catherine nodded, smoothing down the fabric of her dark blue traveling dress. She had packed what little she owned into 2 modest trunks strapped to the top of the coach. Among her possessions were her mother's wedding ring, her father's pocket watch, 3 books, and enough practical clothing to see her through whatever work her uncle might have for her on his ranch. She had no illusions about being a lady of leisure. She expected to earn her keep, and she was prepared to work harder than she ever had in her life. The landscape had been changing gradually over the past few days of travel. The green hills and familiar trees of Missouri had given way to the vast openness of Kansas, and now Colorado rose before them with its dramatic shifts in terrain. Mountains loomed in the distance to the west, their peaks still capped with snow even though it was late May. The air smelled different here, cleaner somehow, tinged with sage and pine and something wild that Catherine could not quite name. She found herself simultaneously terrified and exhilarated by the enormity of the land. Everything felt bigger here, more exposed. There was nowhere to hide, no comfortable anonymity like the crowded streets of St. Louis had offered. Out here, a person stood out against the landscape like a single brushstroke on an empty canvas. The stagecoach stopped at a relay station near sunset, and Catherine climbed down gratefully, her legs stiff from hours of sitting. The station was little more than a rough wooden building with a corral for fresh horses and a well for water. A lanky man with a tobacco-stained beard emerged to help switch out the teams while the driver stretched and complained about his aching back. Catherine walked a short distance from the station, needing a moment of privacy and fresh air. The sun was setting in a spectacular display of orange and gold that seemed to set the entire western horizon ablaze. She had never seen a sunset quite like it. The sky was so vast it made her feel impossibly small, and yet there was something oddly comforting about that smallness, as if her grief and worries were just tiny specks in the grand scheme of this enormous land. "Best not wander too far, miss," a voice called out behind her. Catherine turned to see a man standing near the corner of the station building. He was tall, lean in that way men got when they spent their lives doing hard physical work, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that needed cutting. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowhand, worn denim trousers, a faded shirt, scuffed boots, and a hat that had seen better days. A pistol hung at his hip in a well-used holster. His eyes, she noticed, were a striking shade of blue-gray like storm clouds over water. "I appreciate the concern," Catherine said, keeping her voice polite but firm. She had learned in the past few months that a woman alone needed to establish boundaries quickly, or every man she encountered would assume she needed protecting or worse. "No offense meant," the man said, touching the brim of his hat. Just that we are in country where the Ute and Arapaho still pass through, and not all of them are friendly to settlers. Plus there are rattlesnakes in the rocks this time of year. Would hate to see you come to harm before you even reach wherever you are headed." His tone was matter-of-fact rather than condescending, and Catherine felt her defensiveness ease slightly. "I am traveling to Silver Ridge. Do you know it?" "Know it well enough," the man said. "I work a spread about 15 miles south of there. Been up north delivering some horses to Fort Collins, heading back home now." He paused, then added, "Name is Jesse McCord. Catherine Hayes," she replied. "I am going to stay with my uncle, Thomas Hayes. He has a ranch near Silver Ridge." Something shifted in Jesse McCord's expression, though Catherine could not quite read what it meant. Recognition, certainly, but also something more complicated. "Tom Hayes," Jesse said slowly. "Good man, fair rancher, treats his hands decent. You are his niece from back east." "I am." "Did he mention I was coming?" "Word travels in small towns," Jesse said, which was not quite an answer. "I am sure he will be glad to see you. He has been working that ranch mostly on his own for the past couple years, except for the hands he hires seasonal." The driver called out that they would be departing in 5 minutes, and Catherine excused herself to return to the coach. As she climbed back inside, she caught Jesse McCord watching her with an expression that seemed almost sad, though she could not imagine why. She settled into her seat, and moments later the stagecoach lurched into motion again, carrying her onward through the gathering dusk. They traveled through the night, stopping only once more before dawn began to break over the eastern plains behind them. Catherine dozed fitfully, her head bouncing against the side of the coach, dreaming confused dreams of her father and gunshots and endless empty spaces. When she woke fully, morning light was streaming through the windows, and the landscape had transformed yet again. They were climbing now, following a road that switched back and forth up steep terrain. Pine forests crowded close on either side, and the air coming through the window was noticeably cooler and thinner. Catherine's ears popped as they gained elevation. "Almost to Silver Ridge, Mrs. Dalton announced cheerfully. "See that valley up ahead?" Catherine leaned toward the window, craning her neck to see past the edge of the road. The trees opened up suddenly as they crested a rise, and her breath caught in her throat. Spread before them was a valley of breathtaking beauty. It nestled between mountain ridges like a jewel in a setting, perhaps 5 miles wide and twice that in length. A river ran through its center, glinting silver in the morning sun, and the valley floor was a patchwork of green meadows and darker clusters of trees. She could see buildings scattered throughout, tiny from this distance, and what looked like herds of cattle grazing in the fields. The mountains rose up on all sides, their slopes covered in dense forest that gave way to bare rock and snow at the highest elevations. It was beautiful, but Catherine's first thought was how isolated it seemed, how remote from everything she had known. This valley was a world unto itself, separated from civilization by miles of rough terrain and harsh wilderness. The stagecoach began its descent into the valley, wheels creaking under the strain of holding back against gravity. Catherine gripped the seat as they navigated the steep, winding road. The driver was skilled, she had to give him that, keeping the horses under control and the coach from careening down the mountainside. By mid-morning, they rolled into Silver Ridge proper. The town was larger than Catherine had expected, though still small by the standards of St. Louis. A single main street ran through the center, lined with wooden buildings that bore hand-painted signs. General store, saloon, Silver Ridge Hotel, blacksmith, doctor's office, assay office. There was a white church with a steeple at one end of town and what looked like a schoolhouse beside it. People moved along the wooden boardwalks, going about their business, and horses stood tied to hitching posts outside various establishments. The stagecoach pulled up in front of the hotel, and the driver climbed down to open the door and help the passengers disembark. Catherine stepped out into the Colorado morning, her legs wobbling slightly after so many days of travel. She accepted the driver's hand with a murmured thanks and stood looking around at the town that would be her new home. Miss Hayes. Catherine turned to see a man approaching from across the street. He was in his early 50s, she guessed, with graying hair and a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. He wore clean work clothes and a hat that he removed as he drew near. His eyes, a warm brown, held a mixture of emotions as he looked at her. "I am Catherine Hayes," she confirmed. "Tom Hayes," the man said, extending his hand. "Your uncle. I got word you were on this coach. Welcome to Silver Ridge." Catherine shook his hand, noting the calluses and the strength of his grip. "Thank you for taking me in, Mr. Hayes. I know this is an imposition." "Tom," he corrected gently. "And it is no imposition. You are family and you are welcome for as long as you want to stay. I am only sorry about what happened to your father. Edward was a good man. We had not seen each other in many years, but I wish I could have been there for the funeral." Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes but blinked them back. She had cried enough in the past 3 months. Now was the time to be strong, to move forward. "He spoke of you occasionally. I think he regretted that you had grown apart." Tom nodded solemnly. "Distance has a way of doing that to families, but you are here now and we will make the best of it. Let me get your trunks and we will head out to the ranch. It is about a half-hour ride from town." He arranged for her luggage to be loaded into a sturdy wagon that waited nearby, and soon Catherine found herself sitting on the bench seat beside her uncle as they rolled out of Silver Ridge and onto a dirt track that led southwest across the valley floor. Up close, the land was even more striking than it had appeared from the mountain. The grass was thick and green from snowmelt and spring rains, dotted with wildflowers in shades of purple and yellow. Cattle grazed in the distance, lazy in the warming day. The river they had seen from above wound through the valley like a serpent, its banks lined with willows and cottonwoods. Tom kept up a steady stream of conversation as they drove, pointing out landmarks and neighboring ranches, explaining the rhythms of life in this high valley. The growing season was short, he told her, but the grass was rich and the water abundant, making it good country for raising cattle. Winters were hard, with deep snows and temperatures that could drop dangerously low, but the community pulled together to help each other through. "We are not fancy people here," Tom said as the wagon bounced over a rut. "Life is practical, everyone works hard, and we do not put much stock in pretense. I hope that suits you all right." "I am not looking for fancy," Catherine assured him. "I want to be useful, I want to earn my keep." Tom glanced at her with approval. "You will fit in just fine then. The ranch keeps me busy, and I will not lie, having an extra pair of hands will be a blessing. But I do not want you to think I am taking advantage. This is your home now, Catherine, for as long as you want it to be." They arrived at the ranch shortly before noon. It was a modest operation compared to some of the larger spreads they had passed, but it looked well-maintained and prosperous. The main house was a sturdy log structure with a stone chimney and a wide porch across the front. There was a barn, a stable, a smokehouse, and several smaller outbuildings Catherine could not immediately identify. A garden plot had been fenced off near the house, though it looked somewhat neglected. The whole property sat on a gentle rise with a view across the valley toward the river and the mountains beyond. Tom helped Catherine down from the wagon and carried her trunks into the house. The interior was tidy but sparse, decorated with the practical mindset of a man who lived alone. There was a main room with a fireplace, a kitchen area, and 2 bedrooms off to the sides. Tom showed her to the smaller bedroom, which had a simple bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. "It is not much," he said apologetically. "It is perfect," Catherine said, and meant it. The room was clean and the bed looked comfortable, and after sleeping in stagecoaches and rough way stations for the past week, the thought of having a space of her own felt like unimaginable luxury. Over the next few days, Catherine settled into the rhythms of ranch life. She rose early with Tom, helped prepare meals, tended the garden, and learned the 100 small tasks that kept a household running. Tom was patient with her ignorance, showing her how to work the cast iron stove, where to draw water, how to preserve meat in the smokehouse. She had been reasonably self-sufficient back in St. Louis, managing her father's household after he died, but ranch life required different skills entirely. She met some of Tom's ranch hands when they came by to work with the cattle. There were 3 regular men, an older cowboy named Pete who had more opinions than teeth, a quiet young man named Billy who blushed whenever Catherine spoke to him, and a Mexican vaquero named Carlos who was the best horseman Catherine had ever seen. They were polite to her, tipping their hats and addressing her as Miss Hayes, but she could tell they were not quite sure what to make of her presence on the ranch. On her 5th day at the ranch, Catherine convinced Tom to let her ride out with him to check on the herd in the northern pasture. She was a competent rider, having learned as a girl during summers spent at her grandmother's farm, and Tom found her a gentle mare named Daisy who had a smooth gait and a patient temperament. They rode out in the early morning while the air was still cool and the dew clung to the grass. Tom showed her the boundaries of his property, pointing out landmarks and explaining how he rotated the cattle through different pastures to keep the land healthy. Catherine listened intently, filing away information about this new world she found herself in. As they rode up a gradual slope toward a stand of aspens, Tom pulled his horse to a stop at the crest of a hill. "Come here," he said. "I want to show you something." Catherine urged Daisy forward until she was beside her uncle. He gestured ahead and she looked out over the view he indicated. From this vantage point, the entire valley spread before them in panoramic splendor. She could see Silver Ridge in the distance, small and neat as a child's toy town. The river curved through the meadows and the patchwork of ranches and farms made geometric patterns across the landscape. The mountains rose all around, massive and eternal, their peaks brilliant against the deep blue sky. "This is what I wanted you to see," Tom said quietly. "This valley. This is why I came out here 25 years ago and never left. Back east, everything felt crowded, pressed in. Out here, you can breathe." Catherine stared at the vista, trying to absorb the scale of it. She had been here less than a week, and the landscape still felt foreign and overwhelming. It was beautiful, yes, but it was a harsh beauty, unforgiving and wild. She could not yet see it the way Tom did, as home rather than exile. As if reading her thoughts, Tom said, "It takes time to feel it. The valley gets into your blood slowly, but it does get in, and then you cannot imagine being anywhere else." They were heading back toward the ranch house when they encountered another rider coming across the meadow. Catherine recognized him immediately. Jesse McCord, the cowboy who had spoken to her at the relay station. He sat his horse with the ease of someone who had been born in the saddle, and as he drew near, he touched his hat brim in greeting. "Tom," Jesse said, nodding to Catherine's uncle. Then to Catherine, "Miss Hayes, did not expect to see you out checking cattle." "I asked to come along," Catherine said. "I want to learn about the ranch." "She is a quick study," Tom added. "Jesse, you remember my niece arriving, I imagine." "Met her briefly at the relay station," Jesse confirmed. His gray-blue eyes settled on Catherine with an intensity that made her feel oddly self-conscious. "How are you settling in?" "Well enough, thank you," Catherine replied. "Uncle Tom has been very patient with me. If you need anything, my place is just south of here," Jesse said. "About 5 miles as the crow flies. I run cattle mostly, some horses. If Tom ever needs a hand with anything, he knows where to find me." The 2 men exchanged a few words about cattle prices and water rights, the easy conversation of neighbors who had known each other for years. Catherine listened, trying to understand the dynamics of this community she had entered. It seemed that despite the vast distances between properties, the ranchers maintained close connections, relying on each other in ways city dwellers never had to. When Jesse rode off toward his own land, Tom watched him go with an approving expression. "Jesse is good people," he said. "Came out here about 8 years ago and built his spread from nothing. Works harder than any 2 men I know. A bit of a loner, keeps to himself mostly, but he will give you the shirt off his back if you need it." Catherine filed this information away, though she was not sure why it felt important. They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, and she spent the afternoon helping Tom mend tack in the barn while the wind picked up outside, rattling the door on its hinges. That evening, after a simple supper of beef stew and cornbread, Catherine sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the western mountains. The air had cooled rapidly after dark, and she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the chill. The sky turned through its spectrum of colors, and as the last light faded, stars began to appear overhead in staggering profusion. She had never seen so many stars. Back in St. Louis, the city lights had obscured all but the brightest celestial objects, but here the Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of light. She thought about her father, wondered if he could see her from wherever he was now. Would he approve of her choice to come west? Or would he have wanted her to stay in St. Louis, to marry some shopkeeper or clerk and live a safe, conventional life? She would never know. The gunshot that killed him had stolen so many things, including the chance to ask him these questions. Tom came out and sat beside her on the porch steps. For a while they simply sat together, watching the stars emerge. Finally, Tom said, "You miss him." It was not a question, but Catherine answered anyway. "Every day, every moment, I keep thinking I hear him calling me, or I turn to tell him something and remember he is not there." "Grief is a hard companion," Tom said. "I lost my wife 12 years ago to pneumonia. Some days it still hits me like a fresh wound, but it does get easier in time. Not better, maybe, but easier." Catherine had not known about Tom's wife. Her father had mentioned it once years ago, but she had forgotten. "I am sorry," she said. "We all carry losses," Tom replied. "That is part of living. The trick is not letting the grief define you, not letting it stop you from finding new joys." He stood, stretching his back. "I am heading to bed." "Morning comes early. You take your time out here, enjoy the quiet." After he went inside, Catherine remained on the porch for another hour, wrapped in her shawl, letting the night sounds wash over her. An owl called from the trees near the barn. Coyotes yipped in the distance. The wind sighed through the pines on the mountainside. It was so different from the city cacophony she had known all her life, and yet there was a music to it, a wild symphony that stirred something unexpected in her chest. The following Sunday, Tom asked if she wanted to accompany him to church in Silver Ridge. Catherine agreed, curious to meet more of the community. She dressed in her best remaining dress, a modest gray wool that was slightly too warm for the season but appropriate for a church service, and pinned her dark hair up beneath a simple bonnet. The church was nearly full when they arrived, the congregation representing what seemed like every family in the valley. Catherine felt the weight of curious stares as she and Tom made their way to a pew near the middle. The service itself was traditional, led by a young minister who seemed earnest if somewhat inexperienced. The hymns were sung with more enthusiasm than skill, but there was something moving about hearing these familiar songs in such an unfamiliar setting. After the service, Tom introduced Catherine to what felt like half the town. There was the doctor, a sharp-eyed man named Franklin who assured Catherine that he would be happy to tend to any medical needs. The school teacher, Miss Porter, who was perhaps 5 years older than Catherine and seemed genuinely pleased to meet another educated woman in the valley. The owner of the general store and his wife, who invited Catherine to visit the shop anytime. The names and faces blurred together, overwhelming in their quantity, but everyone seemed genuinely welcoming. She was speaking with Miss Porter about books when she noticed Jesse McCord entering the church. He was dressed more formally than when she had seen him before, wearing a clean shirt and a vest, his hair combed back and his hat in his hands. He moved through the crowd with the ease of someone who was known and respected, pausing to speak with various people. When his eyes found Catherine across the room, something passed between them, a moment of recognition that felt weighted somehow. He excused himself from the conversation he was having and made his way toward her. "Miss Hayes," he said, nodding politely to both her and Miss Porter. "Good to see you in town." "Mr. McCord," Catherine replied. Up close, in better light than the relay station had offered, she could see that he was perhaps 27 or 28 years old, with a strong jaw and lines around his eyes that spoke of long hours squinting against the sun. There was something appealing about his face, she decided, a ruggedness that suited the landscape. Miss Porter excused herself diplomatically, leaving Catherine and Jessie standing together near the church door. For a moment, an awkward silence stretched between them. "How are you finding ranch life?" Jessie asked finally. "It is an adjustment," Catherine admitted, "but Uncle Tom has been wonderfully patient, and the valley is beautiful, though I confess it still feels foreign to me." "That is natural," Jessie said. "Give it time, the valley grows on you." He paused, then added, "If you ever want to see more of it, I would be happy to show you around. There are places in these mountains that will take your breath away." Catherine was not sure if he was simply being neighborly or if there was an undertone of interest in his offer. She decided to treat it as the former, at least for now. "That is kind of you. Perhaps once I am more settled and do not feel like I am still finding my feet." "The offer stands," Jessie said. "Anytime." Tom appeared then, ready to head back to the ranch, and Catherine excused herself from Jessie with a polite goodbye. As they drove home in the wagon, Tom said casually, "Jessie seemed interested in talking to you." "He was just being friendly," Catherine said, though she felt her cheeks warm slightly. "Maybe so," Tom said, but there was a knowing tone in his voice that suggested he suspected otherwise. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Catherine worked alongside Tom, learning the endless tasks that kept the ranch running. She discovered she had a knack for working with the horses, and Tom began letting her help train some of the younger animals. She revived the garden, planting vegetables and herbs, and began preserving food for the coming winter. Her hands, which had been soft and pale in St. Louis, grew tan and calloused. Jesse McCord seemed to have business that brought him past the Hayes Ranch with surprising frequency. Sometimes he would stop to discuss ranching matters with Tom, and he always made a point of greeting Catherine politely. Other times, she would see him in the distance, riding across the valley, and something about the solitary figure against the vast landscape would catch at her attention. She learned more about him through casual conversations with Tom and the ranch hands. Jesse had come west from Texas after the war, looking for a fresh start. He had worked as a ranch hand for several years, saving every penny until he had enough to buy his own land. He had built his ranch through sheer determination and backbreaking work, and now ran a successful operation with a small crew of loyal hands. He was known as honest, hardworking, and reliable, but also as intensely private, rarely speaking about his past or his personal life. One afternoon in late June, Catherine was working in the garden when she heard a horse approach. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw Jesse dismounting near the barn. He spoke briefly with Tom, who pointed toward the garden, and then Jesse walked over to where Catherine stood among the rows of young plants. "Afternoon, Miss Hayes," he said. "Tom said you might appreciate some help with that fence." Catherine looked at the garden fence, which had been sagging on one side despite her best efforts to repair it. "I was managing," she said, though truthfully she had been struggling with it for days. "I do not doubt it," Jesse said, already pulling tools from his saddlebag. But two sets of hands make quicker work. They worked together for the next hour, resetting posts and restringing wire. Jesse moved with efficient competence, his hands sure and steady. Catherine held posts while he tamped dirt around them, and she found herself watching the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt, the way his brow furrowed in concentration. She felt oddly breathless, though whether from the work or his proximity, she could not quite say. "You are settling in well," Jesse observed as they worked. "Tom says you have taken to ranch life better than he expected." "I am trying," Catherine said. "It helps that I want to be useful. I do not want to be a burden." "I doubt you could be a burden if you tried," Jesse said, and there was something in his tone that made Catherine look up sharply. Their eyes met, and for a moment the air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken things. Then Jesse cleared his throat and returned his attention to the fence. "There, that should hold through winter." "Thank you," Catherine said. "That was kind of you." "Just being neighborly," Jesse replied, but his smile suggested it might be more than that. He stayed for supper at Tom's invitation, and the three of them sat around the table in the ranch house, talking about cattle and weather and the small politics of the valley community. Catherine found herself enjoying Jesse's company more than she had expected. He was intelligent and well-spoken when he chose to be, with a dry sense of humor that emerged in unexpected moments. He asked her questions about her life back east, genuinely curious about the world she had come from, and he listened to her answers with focused attention. After Jesse left, riding off into the long summer twilight, Tom looked at Catherine with a raised eyebrow. "He came all this way to fix a fence." "Apparently," Catherine said, though she knew her uncle was not fooled. "Jesse is a good man," Tom said carefully. "Bit rough around the edges, but solid. The kind of man you can trust." Catherine felt herself blushing. "Uncle Tom, I have been here barely a month. I am not looking for anything like that." "Fair enough," Tom said. "But just so you know, you would not get any objection from me if you were." Catherine lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, thinking about Jesse McCord. She had not come west looking for romance. Her heart was still raw from losing her father, and the idea of opening herself to more potential loss felt terrifying. But she could not deny that something about Jesse intrigued her, drew her attention in ways she had not expected. There was a strength to him, but also a gentleness that emerged in unguarded moments. And when he looked at her, she felt seen in a way that was both unsettling and thrilling. She told herself it was too soon, that she needed time to heal and adjust to her new life. But her heart, apparently, had its own ideas about timing. July arrived with hot days and cool nights, and the valley transformed into peak summer glory. The meadows were thick with wildflowers, and the cattle grew fat on rich grass. Catherine continued to work alongside Tom, and she began to feel competent in ways she never had back east. She could saddle a horse, mend tack, birth a calf, shoot a rifle with decent accuracy. Her body grew stronger, her hands more capable. Jesse continued to find reasons to visit, and Catherine found herself looking forward to his appearances with an anticipation she tried not to examine too closely. They developed an easy rapport, teasing each other gently, finding excuses to work side by side on various ranch tasks. Tom watched this developing connection with obvious approval, but had the wisdom not to comment on it directly. One Saturday in mid-July, Jesse arrived at the ranch in the early morning and asked if Catherine would like to ride out to see the high meadow on the eastern ridge. Tom, apparently in on whatever plan this was, immediately insisted that Catherine should go, that she had been working too hard and deserved an afternoon away from chores. Catherine saddled Daisy while Jesse waited on his own horse, a beautiful paint gelding named Scout. They rode out across the valley floor, following a trail that led up into the foothills. The day was perfect, warm but not hot, with a breeze that carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. As they climbed higher, leaving the valley behind, Jesse pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the land. He showed her where a grizzly bear had destroyed a line cabin 2 winters ago, and where a spring flood had altered the course of a creek. He spoke about the valley with the intimate knowledge of someone who had studied every acre, who understood its moods and seasons. They reached the high meadow around midday. It was a hidden gem, a flat expanse of grass surrounded by dense forest, with a small clear pond fed by a spring. Wildflowers carpeted the ground in brilliant profusion. Lupines, paintbrush, columbines in shades of purple, red, and blue. The view from the meadow stretched for miles, encompassing the entire valley below and the mountain ranges beyond. Catherine dismounted and stood at the edge of the meadow, simply staring. She had seen beautiful places before, but this felt different somehow, more intimate and secret, as if Jesse was sharing something precious by bringing her here. Jesse came to stand beside her, so close their shoulders almost touched. They stood in silence for a long moment, and Catherine was intensely aware of his presence, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the way her heart had begun to beat faster. "I have been coming to this meadow since my first year in the valley," Jessie said quietly. "It is my thinking place. When things get heavy, when life feels like too much, I ride up here and sit for a while. Something about this place makes everything seem clearer." "It is beautiful," Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for sharing it with me." Jessie turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. There was vulnerability there, and longing, and something tender that made her chest ache. "Catherine," he said, using her first name for the first time, "I need to tell you something." She waited, her heart pounding. "From the moment I saw you at that relay station, something shifted in me," Jessie said. "I have been alone a long time by choice, convinced I was content with my solitary life. But then you arrived, and suddenly everything felt different. The valley felt different, like it had been waiting for you." Catherine found her voice, though it came out shaky. "Jessie, let me finish," he said gently. "I know you are still grieving your father. I know you came here to heal, not to be courted by some cowboy. But I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel. You have gotten under my skin, Catherine Hayes. I think about you constantly. I find excuses to ride past your uncle's ranch just hoping to catch a glimpse of you. I am usually better at hiding my feelings, but with you, I seem to have lost that ability." Catherine stared at him, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to tell him it was too soon, that she was not ready. But another part, a part that was growing stronger by the moment, recognized the truth in his words because she felt it too. This connection between them, whatever it was, had been growing since that first encounter at the relay station, building through all their subsequent meetings into something that could no longer be ignored. "I think about you too," she admitted, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. "More than I should, probably. I keep telling myself it is too soon, that I should wait, that I need to be sensible. But then you show up and all my sensible thoughts disappear." Jessie smiled, and it transformed his face, softening the hard lines and lighting up his eyes. "So what do we do about this?" "I do not know," Catherine said honestly. "I have never felt this way before. It is terrifying." "We could take it slow," Jessie suggested. "Court properly, give you time to be sure. I am not going anywhere, Catherine. I will wait as long as you need." Catherine looked out at the meadow, at the impossible beauty of this high place, and made a decision. She was tired of being afraid, tired of holding back. Life was short and unpredictable, as her father's death had proved. If she had learned anything from her grief, it was that moments of joy should be seized when they appeared. "I do not want to take it too slow," she said, turning back to Jessie. "I want to see where this goes. I want to spend time with you and learn who you are and let you learn who I am. I want to stop pretending I do not feel this." Jessie's smile widened into a grin. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers. "I can work with that." They spread a blanket near the pond and ate the lunch Jessie had packed in his saddlebags. Bread, cheese, dried apples, and canteen water that tasted faintly of metal and mountain snow. They talked for hours, sharing stories from their pasts, comparing the worlds they had come from. Jessie spoke about growing up in Texas, about losing his parents to fever when he was 16, about fighting in the war and trying to find his place in the broken world that followed. Catherine told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about her mother's death when she was young, about managing her father's household and feeling like life was passing her by even before tragedy struck. They discovered shared loves. Books, though Jessie's collection was small and well-worn, music, though neither could carry a tune, the particular quality of light just after dawn. They found humor in their differences. Catherine's complete ignorance of cattle contrasted with Jessie's inability to cook anything more complex than coffee and beans. They debated, laughed, fell into comfortable silences that did not need filling. The afternoon stretched long and golden, and Catherine felt something inside her chest begin to unfurl, like a flower that had been closed tight against winter finally opening to the sun. She had not realized how much of herself she had locked away in the months since her father's death, how much she had been simply surviving rather than living. But here, in this high meadow with Jessie beside her, she felt herself beginning to return. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Jessie said reluctantly, "We should head back. I do not want Tom to worry." They rode down from the meadow as the light turned golden, then amber, then deep rose. Catherine felt as if she were returning from another world, carrying the magic of the high place back with her into ordinary reality. When they reached the valley floor, Jessie rode close beside her, and their knees occasionally brushed as the horses walked side by side. At the Hayes Ranch, Jessie helped Catherine unsaddle Daisy and brush her down. Tom emerged from the house, took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly but said nothing beyond a simple greeting. Before Jessie left, he took Catherine's hand again, holding it gently. "Can I call on you properly?" "Take you to the church social next week?" "Yes," Catherine said, her heart feeling light and full at once. "I would like that." She watched him ride away into the dusk, and when she turned to go inside, Tom was standing on the porch with his arms crossed and an expression that was equal parts amused and pleased. "Do not say anything," Catherine warned him. "Would not dream of it," Tom said, but his grin suggested otherwise. The church social the following Saturday was held in the meadow beside the church, with tables set up for a potluck supper and space cleared for dancing. Catherine wore her best dress, a deep green cotton that brought out her eyes, and pinned her hair up with the small pearl combs that had been her mother's. She felt nervous in a way that had nothing to do with meeting the community and everything to do with the prospect of spending an evening with Jessie in public, making whatever was developing between them known to the valley. Jessie arrived at the ranch in a wagon rather than on horseback, wearing clean clothes and looking slightly uncomfortable in his formality. He helped Catherine up to the bench seat, and they drove to town together, with Tom riding his own horse alongside them. The meadow was crowded with people when they arrived, and Catherine felt the weight of curious eyes as she and Jessie walked together toward the tables. But if there was gossip, it was friendly, and several women approached Catherine with genuine warmth, welcoming her more fully into the community now that she was attending social events. The food was abundant and varied, with everyone contributing their best dishes. Catherine had made an apple cake under Tom's guidance, using fruit from last year's harvest that he had stored in the root cellar. It disappeared quickly, and she felt an absurd flush of pride at its reception. After supper, someone produced a fiddle and another person a guitar, and dancing began. Jessie, it turned out, was a surprisingly good dancer, leading Catherine through reels and waltzes with confident ease. "Where did a cowboy learn to dance?" Catherine asked, breathless and laughing. "My mother insisted," Jessie said. She believed a gentleman should be able to dance, even if he was going to spend his life chasing cattle. They danced several dances together before propriety required they separate and dance with other partners. Catherine found herself passed from one rancher to another, all of them polite and mostly competent. But her eyes kept finding Jessie across the meadow, and every time their gazes met, she felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the exertion of dancing. Later, as the evening cooled and the stars emerged, Jessie and Catherine walked to the edge of the meadow away from the crowd. The sound of music and laughter drifted behind them, but here at the margins it was quieter, more intimate. "Are you happy?" Jessie asked, taking her hand. Catherine considered the question seriously. A few months ago, she would have said happiness was impossible, that grief had stolen her capacity for joy. But standing here beneath the vast Colorado sky, her hand warm in Jessie's, she realized something had shifted. "I am beginning to be," she said. "It surprises me. I thought I would spend years grieving before I could feel anything else. But this place, this valley, and you have helped me find my way back to myself. Jessie lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. "You have done something similar for me. I did not realize how lonely I was until I met you. I had convinced myself that solitude was strength, that needing another person was weakness. But you have shown me that is not true." Catherine stepped closer, closing the distance between them until they were nearly touching. She could feel the warmth of him, smell the scent of soap and leather and something uniquely Jessie. Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. "Kiss me," she whispered, surprised by her own boldness. Jessie's eyes darkened with emotion. He cupped her face gently in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones, and then he lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was everything and nothing like Catherine had imagined. It was gentle but passionate, tender but urgent, a question and an answer all at once. She felt it in her entire body, a warmth that spread from her lips through her chest and into her limbs. Her hands came up to grip his shoulders, needing something to anchor her as the world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jessie rested his forehead against hers. "Catherine Hayes, you are going to be the undoing of me." "Good," Catherine said, smiling. "You have been undoing me for weeks now. It is only fair." They returned to the social eventually, trying to look composed though Catherine suspected her flushed face and bright eyes gave her away. If Tom noticed, he had the grace not to comment, though his approving smile spoke volumes. Over the following weeks, Jessie courted Catherine with patient determination. He came to the ranch most evenings after finishing his own work, and they would sit on the porch talking until the stars came out. He brought her wildflowers from the high meadows, a new book he had ordered from Denver, a beautiful river stone that was perfectly smooth and cool to the touch. They rode together across the valley, exploring the landscape, and Catherine began to see the land through Jessie's eyes, to appreciate its wild beauty and understand why it had captured his heart so completely. In August, Jessie invited Catherine to visit his ranch. Tom nodded his approval, and Catherine rode over on a Saturday morning, following the directions Jessie had given her. His property was similar in size to Tom's but more isolated, tucked into a side valley with mountains rising steeply behind it. The buildings were newer than Tom's, built by Jessie's own hands, and everything was maintained with meticulous care. Jessie showed her around with obvious pride, introducing her to his small crew of ranch hands and showing her the horses he was training. His home was a simple cabin, smaller than Tom's house, with a single large room dominated by a fireplace and a loft space for sleeping. It was spare but clean, with a few personal touches that gave Catherine insight into Jessie's inner life. A photograph of a couple she assumed were his parents, a small collection of books on a rough-hewn shelf, a saddle he was meticulously repairing. They spent the day together, working side by side on various ranch tasks. Catherine helped Jessie repair a section of corral fence, and later they rode out to check on his herd in the upper pasture. Being with Jessie felt easy in a way Catherine had never experienced before. There was no need to perform or pretend. They could work in comfortable silence or talk for hours, and both felt equally natural. As they sat on Jessie's porch watching the sunset, he took her hand and said, "I need to tell you something." Catherine felt a flutter of nervousness. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you," Jessie said simply. "Actually, I think I have already fallen. I have been trying to take things slow like I promised, trying to give you space and time, but I cannot keep pretending what I feel is anything less than love." Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling right and true as they left her lips. "I think I started loving you that first day at the relay station, even though I did not know it then." Jessie pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and Catherine rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady thump of his heart. They sat like that as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, two people who had been alone finding in each other a home more precious than any place. In September, Jesse asked Tom for permission to marry Catherine. Tom gave his blessing enthusiastically, saying he could not imagine a better match. When Jesse proposed to Catherine, kneeling in the garden she had worked so hard to cultivate, presenting her with a simple gold band he had ridden to Denver to purchase, Catherine said yes, without a moment's hesitation. They were married in late October, just as the aspens turned gold on the mountainsides and the air took on the crisp bite of approaching winter. The whole valley turned out for the wedding, held in the small church with Reverend Thomas presiding. Catherine wore a dress of ivory silk that Miss Porter had helped her sew, and Jesse wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable but devastatingly handsome. As they stood before the congregation, exchanging vows, Catherine felt the weight of the moment. She was binding her life to Jesse's, choosing to build a future here in this wild valley so far from everything she had known. It should have felt terrifying, but instead it felt like coming home. The reception was held at Tom's ranch, with tables groaning under the weight of food and drink, and dancing that lasted until well past midnight. Catherine danced with Jesse, with Tom, with what felt like every man in the valley, but always her eyes returned to her husband, this man who had appeared in her life when she most needed him and had showed her that joy could coexist with grief, that new beginnings were possible even after devastating loss. As the party wound down, Jesse and Catherine prepared to leave for his ranch, which would now be their home together. Tom hugged Catherine tightly, his eyes suspiciously bright. "You are always welcome here," he said. "This will always be home too." "I know," Catherine said, hugging him back. "Thank you, Uncle Tom, for everything. For taking me in when I had nowhere else to go, for giving me a chance to start over, for welcoming Jesse so openly." "You brought life back to this valley," Tom said. "Both of you, that is a gift." Jesse and Catherine rode through the moonlit valley toward their home, the night clear and cold around them. When they arrived at the cabin, Jesse dismounted and then lifted Catherine down from her horse, holding her for a long moment before setting her feet on the ground. "Welcome home, Mrs. McCord," he said, and Catherine felt her heart swell with happiness at the sound of her new name. Inside the cabin, a fire burned in the hearth that one of Jesse's hands must have lit earlier. The single room glowed with warm light, and Catherine looked around at what was now her home. Jesse had made small changes in preparation for her arrival. Curtains on the windows, a larger table, a rocking chair that she recognized as having come from Tom's ranch. Jesse came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" "That I am happy," Catherine said simply. "That I never imagined I could feel this way, that I am grateful for every choice that brought me here to you." They made love for the first time that night with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless and amazed. Afterwards, lying wrapped in each other's arms in the loft bed beneath the sloped roof, Catherine felt a peace she had not known since before her father's death. The grief was still there, would always be there in some form, but it no longer defined her. She had found joy again, had found love, had found a future worth building. The first winter of their marriage was hard. Snow came early and stayed late, piling in drifts against the cabin walls and making travel between ranches nearly impossible for days at a time. But the isolation brought its own gifts. Catherine and Jesse learned each other's rhythms, figured out how to live together in the small space, discovered the thousand small accommodations and compromises that make a marriage work. Jesse taught Catherine skills she had never imagined needing: how to butcher a deer, how to read the weather by observing the behavior of animals, how to keep a fire burning efficiently through a long, cold night. Catherine taught Jesse things too: how to cook meals beyond his repertoire of coffee and beans, how to find pleasure in reading aloud together by firelight, how to talk about feelings and fears rather than bottling them up inside. They argued occasionally, sharp words exchanged in the frustration of cabin fever, but they learned to apologize, to forgive, to remember that they were on the same side. And the intimacy they shared, both physical and emotional, deepened with each passing week, until Catherine could not imagine her life without Jessie at the center of it. When spring finally broke in late April, melting the snow and revealing the valley floor once more, Catherine and Jessie emerged from their winter cocoon changed. They had weathered their first real test as a married couple and come through stronger for it. Catherine threw herself into planting a larger garden at the ranch, determined to grow enough vegetables to see them through the next winter. Jessie worked with his hands and cattle, rebuilding what the harsh winter had damaged, preparing for the work of spring and summer. They fell into a rhythm of labor and rest, of working side by side during the day and coming together in the evening to share meals and conversation and the deep comfort of each other's presence. In June, Catherine realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mix of emotions: joy, fear, excitement, anxiety. She told Jessie one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and the expression on his face, wonder and love and naked vulnerability, made tears stream down her cheeks. "We are going to have a baby," Jessie said, as if testing the words. Then, with growing wonder, "we are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Catherine asked, suddenly needing reassurance. Jessie pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. Happy does not begin to cover it. Terrified, yes. Amazed, absolutely, but happier than I have ever been. The pregnancy progressed through the summer and into fall. Catherine continued working as much as she could, though Jessie became increasingly protective, trying to prevent her from doing anything too strenuous. She found his concern endearing even when it frustrated her, and they negotiated a compromise where she agreed to be sensible about her limitations in exchange for Jessie not treating her like she was made of glass. Tom was delighted by the news that he would be a great uncle, and he became a regular presence at their ranch, always finding excuses to check on Catherine and make sure she had everything she needed. Jessie's ranch hands treated her with a gentleness that might have been amusing if it was not so touching. Even the doctor, Franklin, stopped by regularly to check on her progress and offer advice. As her belly grew and the baby began to move inside her, Catherine found herself thinking often about her own mother, wishing she could have known her as an adult, could have asked her about pregnancy and motherhood and all the mysteries that came with bringing a new life into the world. But she had Jessie and Tom and a community of women who rallied around her with advice and support and offers of help. In late February, on a cold, clear night when the stars seemed close enough to touch, Catherine went into labor. Jessie rode through the darkness to fetch Dr. Franklin and returned to find Catherine breathing through contractions with a determination that made him simultaneously proud and terrified. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Jessie stayed by Catherine's side the entire time, holding her hand, offering water and encouraging words, feeling more helpless and afraid than he ever had in his life. Dr. Franklin was competent and calm, and Tom arrived at some point to pace in the main room of the cabin, offering moral support through his presence even though he could do nothing practical. Finally, as the afternoon sun slanted through the cabin windows, Catherine gave one final push and their son entered the world, red and squalling and absolutely perfect. Dr. Franklin cleaned the baby and placed him in Catherine's arms, and she looked down at the tiny face with an overwhelming surge of love so powerful it felt like her heart might burst. Jessie, tears streaming unashamedly down his face, touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger. The infant gripped it instinctively, and Jessie made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "He is beautiful," Jessie whispered. "You are amazing, I love you so much." "We did it," Catherine said, exhausted and exhilarated. "We made a person." They named him Thomas Edward McCord, after both grandfathers, though they called him Tommy from the start. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, with Catherine's dark hair and eyes that shifted between gray and blue like Jessie is. The early months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Catherine and Jesse stumbled through the learning curve of caring for an infant, figuring out how to function on minimal sleep, learning to read their son's different cries and needs. But there was joy in every small milestone, every smile and coo and tiny achievement. As Tommy grew, Catherine watched Jesse transform into a father. He was patient and gentle with their son, singing him off-key lullabies and carrying him in a sling while he did ranch work. The love Jesse had for their child was fierce and tender and completely unguarded, and Catherine fell in love with her husband all over again watching him with Tommy. The years that followed were full ones. They added to their ranch, buying additional land and building a larger house that had separate rooms and space for their growing family. Catherine had a daughter 2 years after Tommy, a spirited girl they named Rose, who seemed to enter the world already knowing her own mind. Then another son, William, who was quieter and more thoughtful than his siblings. Jesse prospered as a rancher, his careful management and hard work paying off in steady growth and respect throughout the valley. Catherine became known for her skill with horses and her generous spirit, always ready to help a neighbor in need. Together they built not just a ranch but a legacy, a place of warmth and love and hard-won prosperity. Tom remained a constant presence in their lives, growing older but never losing his wry humor or his joy in his extended family. He taught Tommy to ride and fish, told Rose stories about her mother's arrival in the valley, and bounced baby William on his knee with a gentleness that belied his weathered exterior. One summer evening, when Tommy was 7 and Rose was 5 and William was an infant sleeping in his cradle, Jesse suggested they ride up to the high meadow for a picnic. Catherine agreed eagerly, always happy for an excuse to visit the place that held such significance in their relationship. They rode as a family, with Tommy on his own pony and Rose riding double with Jesse, Catherine carrying William in a sling against her chest. The climb took longer with children, but that did not matter. It was about the journey as much as the destination. When they reached the meadow, it was just as Catherine remembered. Wildflowers carpeting the ground, the pond crystal clear, the view stretching endlessly across the valley. But this time, as she looked out over that vista, everything was different. The valley that had once seemed foreign and overwhelming now felt like home, as familiar and beloved as her own heartbeat. Jesse came to stand beside her, just as he had all those years ago when he first brought her here. Tommy and Rose ran through the flowers, their laughter bright in the thin mountain air. "What are you thinking?" Jesse asked, the same question he always asked. Catherine leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, hearing the soft breathing of their infant son against her chest, watching their older children play. "I am thinking about the first time you brought me here. Do you remember?" "Every detail," Jesse said. "I told you I loved you that day. Best decision I ever made." "I was so scared," Catherine admitted, "of feeling too much, of risking my heart again after losing my father, but you made me brave." Jesse turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You were always brave, Catherine. You came west alone, started a new life, opened yourself to love even though you were terrified. That is the definition of courage." Catherine looked past him at the valley spread below, the patchwork of ranches and farms, the river winding through it all, the mountains standing eternal guard around the edges. She thought about the day she had first seen this valley from the mountain road, how empty and foreign it had seemed, how she had wondered if she would ever feel at home here. And she remembered a moment, months later, when Jesse had brought her to a different overlook and watched her face as she took in the view. She had not said anything then, but he must have read something in her expression because he had smiled and said softly, "It all looked empty until you came here." At the time, she had thought he was being romantic, speaking in the flowery language of courtship. But now, years later with their children playing nearby and a lifetime of shared moments behind them, she understood what he had really meant. The valley had not been empty before she arrived, but Jesse's experience of it had been. She had filled something in him, just as he had filled something in her. They had completed each other, made each other whole. "I love you," Catherine said, the words as true now as they had been on their wedding day, truer maybe, deepened by years of partnership and parenthood and the everyday work of building a life together. "I love you too," Jessie replied, kissing her softly. "Every day more than the day before." They spread blankets in the meadow and ate their picnic, while Tommy asked endless questions about everything he saw and Rose tried to catch butterflies, and William slept peacefully in Catherine's arms. The afternoon stretched long and golden, time seeming to slow in this high place removed from the world's demands. Eventually, as the sun began its descent, they packed up and began the ride back down to the valley. Catherine looked back once at the meadow, fixing it in her memory, adding this day to all the other precious moments that had accumulated like treasures over the years. As they descended through the forest, Tommy riding ahead with Jessie while Rose dozed in Catherine's arms and William stirred against her chest, Catherine felt a profound sense of gratitude. Her life had not turned out anything like she had imagined when she was a young woman in St. Louis. She had lost her father, left everything familiar, come west to an unknown future. The path had been difficult, marked by grief and fear and uncertainty, but it had led her here to this valley, to Jessie, to this family they had created together. Every hardship had been worth it to arrive at this moment of such complete and perfect happiness. The years continued to pass, each one adding layers to their story. Tommy grew into a serious young man who loved the ranch and everything about it, already showing signs of becoming the kind of rancher his father was. Rose remained spirited and independent, determined to do everything her brothers could do and usually succeeding. William grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books and animals equally. Catherine and Jessie added one more child to their family, another daughter they named Grace, who arrived when Catherine was 33 and Jessie was 38. Grace was a surprise but a welcome one, completing their family in a way that felt perfect and right, through all of it, through the challenges of raising children and running a ranch and navigating the inevitable ups and downs of life. Catherine and Jessie remained each other's anchor. They still rode to the high meadow sometimes, just the two of them, recapturing for an afternoon the early days of their courtship. They still sat on their porch in the evenings, talking and sharing companionable silence. They still reached for each other in the night, their love deepening and evolving but never diminishing. Tom lived to see all four of his great-nieces and great-nephews grow into childhood before he passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72. His death was a profound loss, but Catherine took comfort in knowing he had lived to see her happy, to see the family she and Jessie had built. They buried him on his own ranch, under the aspens he had loved, and Catherine planted wildflowers on his grave every spring. The valley itself changed gradually over the decades. Silver Ridge grew from a rough frontier town into a more established community with a proper school and a library and regular mail service. New families arrived, drawn by the beauty and opportunity of the high country. But the essential character of the place remained. Hard-working people making lives in a harsh but magnificent landscape, supporting each other through the difficulties and celebrating together in the good times. As Catherine moved through her 30s and into her 40s, she sometimes marveled at the journey her life had taken. She had left St. Louis as a grieving, frightened young woman with no clear sense of who she was or what she wanted. The valley had shaped her, and Jessie's love had revealed her, and motherhood had completed her transformation into someone strong and capable and deeply rooted in this place. On her 45th birthday, Jessie surprised her by organizing a party at their ranch. It seemed like the entire valley turned out, cramming into their large house and spilling out onto the porch and yard. There was music and dancing and more food than could possibly be eaten. Their children, now ranging from Tommy at 22 to Grace at 12, helped host with varying degrees of enthusiasm. As Catherine looked around at the gathered crowd, at the faces of friends and neighbors who had become like family over the years, she felt overwhelmed with emotion. These people had welcomed her when she was a stranger, had supported her through the challenges of frontier life, had celebrated her joys and mourned her losses alongside her. Jesse found her standing alone for a moment on the porch, taking a breath of cool evening air. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back against him, feeling the familiar solid strength of his body. "Happy birthday, my love," he murmured against her ear. "Thank you for this," Catherine said, gesturing at the party continuing inside. "It is too much." "Nothing is too much for you," Jesse said. "You are the center of everything good in my life. I would give you the world if I could." Catherine turned in his arms to face him. His hair was gray at the temples now, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. More importantly, he was still the kindest, the most honorable, the one who made her laugh and held her when she cried and loved her with an unwavering constancy that had never faltered in all their years together. "You have given me everything I need," she said. "This life, this family, this home. You showed me that it was possible to be happy again after loss. You taught me that love does not diminish grief but coexists with it, that we can honor our past while still embracing our future." "We taught each other," Jesse corrected gently. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, maybe more." They stood together on the porch, the sounds of the party a warm hum behind them, and looked out at the valley lit by the last rays of sunset. The mountains stood dark against the glowing sky, eternal and unchanging, and Catherine felt the same sense of awe she had felt when she first saw this place all those years ago. But now it was mingled with love, with belonging, with the deep satisfaction of a life well lived in a place that had become home in every sense of the word. Their oldest son, Tommy, married a rancher's daughter from the northern end of the valley when he was 24. And Catherine and Jesse became grandparents the following year. Holding her first grandchild, a boy named Jesse after his grandfather, Catherine felt the circle of life completing itself in a beautiful and profound way. She thought of her own mother, wished she could have known her grandchildren, and promised herself she would be the kind of grandmother who was present and involved and full of love. Rose, true to her independent spirit, took a job teaching at the Silver Ridge School when she was 19, and showed no signs of settling down with any of the young men who courted her. Catherine worried sometimes that Rose was too independent for her own good, but Jesse reminded her that their daughter would find her path in her own time, just as they had found theirs. William surprised everyone by announcing at 17 that he wanted to go to college in Denver to study veterinary medicine. Catherine and Jesse scraped together the money to send him, proud beyond words that their son wanted more education. He returned 3 years later with his degree and set up a practice in Silver Ridge, becoming the valley's first real veterinarian and filling a need the community had not realized it had. Grace, their youngest, remained at home longer than her siblings, content to help run the ranch and learn everything she could from her parents. She had inherited Catherine's way with horses and Jesse's business sense, and it became clear she would one day run the ranch alongside Tommy. As Catherine moved through her 50s, she sometimes felt the weight of years in her bones and joints. Ranch work was physically demanding, and decades of hard labor had taken their toll, but she never regretted the life she had chosen. Every ache and pain was a testament to a life lived fully, to work that mattered, to a home and family built with her own hands and heart. Jesse aged beside her, his hair going fully silver, his body still strong but moving with more care than it once had. They talked sometimes about slowing down, about letting the younger generation take over more of the ranch work. But both of them found it difficult to step back from the life they had built together. One spring morning, when Catherine was 57 and Jesse was 62, they rode out together to check on the cattle in the north pasture. It was the kind of perfect Colorado day that made all the hard winters worthwhile. Clear blue sky, warm sun, a breeze carrying the scent of pine and new grass. As they crested a familiar rise, Jesse pulled his horse to a stop. Catherine drew up beside him, and they sat side by side looking out over the valley. From this vantage point, they could see their entire ranch spread below them, the house they had built, the barns and outbuildings, the neat fences and well-maintained pastures. Beyond that stretched the rest of the valley, a patchwork of ranches and farms, and the little town of Silver Ridge nestled at the base of the mountains. "Do you ever regret it?" Jesse asked suddenly. "Staying here, building this life?" "You could have gone back east, married some wealthy man, lived in comfort." Catherine looked at him in surprise. "Not once, not for a single moment. This is exactly the life I was meant to live." "I think about the day I first saw you at that relay station," Jesse said, his eyes distant with memory. "You looked so lost, so determined to be brave even though you were terrified. I knew in that moment that you were going to change my life, though I had no idea how much." "I was terrified," Catherine admitted, "of everything. The journey, the unknown, the prospect of starting over in a place I had never seen. But then I got here and I met you, and slowly this valley stopped feeling foreign and started feeling like home." Jesse reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. "Do you remember when I brought you to that overlook, early on when we were just beginning to court? You stood there looking at the valley and your whole face changed. You went from looking scared to looking like you were seeing something beautiful for the first time." "I remember," Catherine said softly. "I said something to you then." "Do you remember what it was?" Catherine smiled, tears pricking at her eyes. "You said it all looked empty until you came here." "It was true," Jesse said, squeezing her hand. "Not just the valley, though that too, but my life, my heart, everything felt empty before you. You filled all the spaces I did not even know were hollow. You made everything richer, more beautiful, more meaningful." Catherine blinked back tears, overcome with emotion. After more than 30 years of marriage, Jesse could still make her cry with the depth of his love, the poetry he found in describing their life together. "You did the same for me," she said, her voice thick. "I came here broken, grieving, convinced I would never be whole again. But you showed me that wholeness does not mean being without scars or pain. It means finding someone who loves you, including your broken places, who helps you heal while honoring what you have lost." They sat together on their horses, hands clasped, looking out over the valley they had made their home. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the air, and somewhere in the distance a hawk cried out, wheeling through the brilliant sky. "We built something good here," Jesse said finally. "Not just the ranch, but a family, a legacy. Our children and grandchildren will tell stories about us someday, about the woman who came west alone and the cowboy who loved her, about how they built a life together in this valley." "I hope they tell them we were happy," Catherine said. "That despite all the hardships and losses, we chose joy, that we loved each other well." "They will know," Jesse assured her, "because we are still showing them every day. The way we look at each other, the way we work together, the way we have weathered every storm and come through still standing, still together." They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, and Catherine felt a profound sense of peace settling over her. Her life had been long and full, marked by both joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle. But through it all, she had Jesse beside her, and that had made all the difference. The years continued their steady march. Catherine and Jesse became great-grandparents, watching their family tree branch and grow. They finally did slow down, turning over more of the ranch operations to Tommy and Grace while they took on advisory roles. But they never fully retired, never stopped working entirely. The ranch was too much a part of them, woven too tightly into the fabric of their lives to simply walk away. Catherine was 63 when Jesse fell ill. It started as a bad cold that would not clear, and by the time Dr. Franklin examined him, it had developed into pneumonia. They caught it early enough that recovery was possible, but Jesse's age worked against him. For 2 weeks, Catherine barely left his bedside, administering medicine, cooling his fever, talking to him and reading to him and willing him to fight. Their children gathered, fear written on every face. But Jesse was tough, shaped by decades of hard living, and slowly, agonizingly slowly, he began to improve. When he was finally out of danger, Catherine collapsed in a chair beside his bed and cried with relief so profound it left her shaking. "You are not leaving me," she said fiercely when she could speak. "We are not done yet. Do you understand? We have more years together." Jesse, still weak but clearly on the mend, took her hand and smiled. "I am not going anywhere. I have to stick around to see what kind of trouble you get into." He recovered fully over the following months, though the illness left him frailer than before. Catherine found herself taking on a more protective role, making sure he did not overexert himself, insisting he take time to rest. Jesse grumbled about being coddled but secretly seemed to enjoy her attentions. On their 35th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren organized a celebration at the ranch. The whole valley seemed to turn out, just as they had for Catherine's birthday years before. There was food and music and dancing and speeches about the legacy Catherine and Jesse had built, about the love they had shared that had become legendary in the community. When it came time for toasts, Tommy stood and raised his glass. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "They taught us what love looks like when it endures, when it faces hardship and chooses to stay anyway. They showed us that the best kind of life is one built with honesty and hard work and an open heart. Everything good in my life comes from what they taught me, from the example they set." To Catherine and Jesse McCord. The crowd echoed the toast, and Catherine felt tears streaming down her face. Jesse wrapped his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close, and she leaned into him, feeling the familiar warmth and strength of the man she loved. Later, when the party had wound down and only family remained, Catherine and Jesse walked out to the porch. The night was clear and cool, with stars blazing overhead in extravagant profusion. They sat in their rocking chairs, the ones they had purchased years ago and that now bore the smooth patina of decades of use. 35 years, Jesse said wonderingly. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like we just got married yesterday." "I know what you mean," Catherine said. "I look at our grandchildren and great-grandchildren and marvel that so much time has passed. But then I look at you and I am 22 again, standing in that high meadow while you tell me you are falling in love with me." "I never stopped falling," Jesse said. "Every day, over and over, I fall in love with you again." They rocked gently in the evening air, hands clasped between their chairs, and Catherine felt a bone-deep contentment. This was what she had been looking for all those years ago when she stepped off the stagecoach in Silver Ridge, though she had not known it then. Not just a place to live, but a person to love. Not just shelter, but home. Not just survival, but joy. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Winters came and went, each one leaving them a little older, a little more aware of time's passage. Springs arrived with their promise of renewal, summers blazed hot and brilliant, autumns painted the aspens gold. Through it all, Catherine and Jesse remained each other's constant, weathering the years together with the same partnership that had defined their marriage from the beginning. When Catherine was 68 and Jesse was 73, they took one last ride to the high meadow. It was summer, and the wildflowers were in full bloom, just as they had been on that long-ago day when Jesse first brought her there. The climb was harder now, their bodies no longer as strong or flexible as they once were, but they made it, driven by the need to return once more to the place where their love story had truly begun. They sat at the edge of the meadow, looking out over the valley that had been their home for so many years. Catherine could trace the shape of their lives in that landscape, the ranch where they had raised their children, the town where they had built friendships and community, the mountains that had stood witness to every joy and sorrow. "Thank you," Catherine said suddenly. Jesse turned to look at her. "For what? For everything. For loving me when I did not think I could be loved. for giving me a family and a home, for every moment of the past decades, for choosing me over and over day after day." "Catherine Hayes McCord," Jesse said, his voice rough with emotion. "Loving you has been the greatest privilege and joy of my life. You are worth the wait, worth every moment, worth everything, and I would choose you again in every lifetime without hesitation." They kissed, a gentle press of lips that held within it the accumulated tenderness of 37 years of marriage. And then they simply sat, holding each other, watching the sun trace its arc across the sky above their beloved valley. As the afternoon waned and it was time to return home, Catherine took one last long look at the meadow, memorizing every detail. She did not know if they would be able to make this journey again, but she carried the place in her heart anyway, along with all the other memories they had built together. They lived several more good years, moving more slowly but still active, still engaged with their family and community. Catherine was 74 when Jesse passed away peacefully in his sleep one winter night, his hand clasped in hers even in death. The grief was profound, a tsunami that threatened to pull her under, but she remembered what Jesse had once told her about grief and joy coexisting. She mourned him deeply, while also celebrating the extraordinary gift of the life they had shared. The entire valley turned out for Jesse's funeral, testifying to the impact he had made in his nearly 50 years in Colorado. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the valley and mountains he had loved. Catherine planted wildflowers on his grave, seeds gathered from the high meadow, so that every spring their beauty would mark the place where he rested. Without Jesse, the world felt diminished, colors less bright, joy more muted. But Catherine was not alone. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love, and the community she and Jesse had helped build held her through her grief. Slowly, painfully, she learned to live in a world without him while still carrying him in her heart. She remained in their home on the ranch, refusing all suggestions that she move in with one of her children. This house held too many memories, too much of Jesse for her to leave. Besides, she was not done yet. She still had work to do, stories to tell, love to give. Catherine lived to be 82, her body finally failing but her mind sharp until the end. She died surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, in the house she and Jesse had built, with a view of the valley through the window beside her bed. In her final moments, as her family whispered their love and goodbyes, Catherine smiled. Because she could see Jesse waiting for her, young and strong as he had been when they first met, standing in a meadow full of wildflowers beneath an impossibly blue sky. He reached out his hand to her, and she took it, feeling the familiar warmth and strength of his grip. "Welcome home," Jesse said, and Catherine knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. At her funeral, Tommy stood to speak about his mother's life. He told the gathered crowd about a young woman who had come west grieving and alone, who had found love in an unexpected place, who had built a family and a legacy through sheer determination and an open heart. He spoke about the partnership his parents had modeled, the way their love had been both passionate and practical, rooted in mutual respect and daily choice. "My mother taught us that courage is not the absence of fear but the decision to move forward despite it," Tommy said. "She showed us that joy and sorrow can coexist, that we can honor our losses while still embracing new beginnings. And she proved, every single day of her life, that love is the most powerful force there is. When it is real, when it is deep, when it is chosen again and again through all circumstances, love can sustain us through anything." They buried Catherine beside Jesse on the hill overlooking the ranch. The wildflowers she had planted on his grave had spread, carpeting the ground in brilliant color. As the sun set over the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the family stood together, mourning and celebrating in equal measure. Tommy looked out over the valley, seeing it as his mother must have seen it that first time from the mountain road, vast and beautiful and slightly overwhelming. But she had not let that stop her. She had descended into this valley and made it her home, had loved and been loved in return, had left a mark that would endure for generations. He thought about his father's words, spoken so many years ago but never forgotten. It all looked empty until you came here. And he understood, finally and fully, what Jesse had meant. Not that the valley itself was empty, but that love transforms everything it touches, filling empty spaces and making the ordinary extraordinary. The McCord Ranch continued through the generations that followed, passing from Tommy and Grace to their children and then to theirs. The family grew and branched, spreading across the valley and beyond. But they carried with them the stories of Catherine and Jesse, the woman from the East and the cowboy who loved her, who had built something lasting in a wild place. And every spring, without fail, wildflowers bloomed on that hill overlooking the ranch, a living memorial to a love that had begun in grief and grown into joy, that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger, that had proved beyond any doubt that the greatest journeys often begin with the smallest steps, and that home is not a place but a person, found when you least expect it and cherished for all your days. The valley itself remained, eternal and beautiful, its mountains standing guard over the ranches and families that made their lives in its shelter. And though many years passed, and the world changed in countless ways, the essential truth remained the same. Love, when it is true and deep and chosen daily, can transform everything. It can turn grief into joy, strangers into family, and an empty valley into the fullest, most complete home a heart could ever know.